For 365 straight days, I prayed for a miracle to fix the most broken part of my life. I documented it, I tracked it, and I begged for it. I was looking for a sign, some huge, undeniable intervention that would change everything in a flash. The miracle I got wasn't the one I asked for. It wasn't loud or flashy, and it definitely didn't fix my problem overnight. But it's the one that saved me. And it all started on a day I was so sure I was beyond saving. A little over a year ago, my entire world had shrunk to the size of my apartment. On most days, it felt like it had shrunk to the size of my bed. The broken part one was praying to fix was a relentless, suffocating anxiety that had hijacked my life. I'm not just talking about feeling nervous before a big meeting. This was a constant physical hum under my skin. It was a tightness in my chest that, at least once a day, convinced me I was having a heart attack. It was a voice in my head that meticulously cataloged every possible worst-case scenario for every single decision until the only safe choice felt like doing nothing at all. It crept in subtly a few years before, a small knot of worry here, a skipped party there, but it had ballooned into a monster. I lost my job because I started having panic attacks during team meetings. The thought of the fluorescent lights, the forced small talk, the pressure to just be on it was all too much. I called in sick so often that my boss eventually and kindly had to let me go. I lied to my friends. I told them I was busy, that I was swamped with freelance work, that I was just in an introverted phase. The truth? The idea of choosing a restaurant, making conversation, or even just getting in the car to meet them felt like trying to climb Everest. So, one by one, the invitation stopped. My life was a loop of the same four walls. Wake up, feel that immediate, familiar dread in my stomach. Binge watch something, anything, to drown out the noise in my head. Order food because the grocery store was an impossible mission. And all of it was wrapped in this profound, heavy blanket of shame. I was smart, I was capable, I used to be ambitious. Now, I was a prisoner in my own home, held captive by my own mind. I was drowning. The breaking point, the thing that kicked off this whole experiment, wasn't some dramatic event. It was quiet. It was a Tuesday. I was standing in my kitchen and dropped a glass. As it shattered on the floor, I just broke right along with it. I slid down the wall and started sobbing. Not about the glass, but about the sheer, crushing weight of my own existence. I was so tired of fighting, so tired of being afraid. And in that moment of complete, helpless desperation, I looked up at the ceiling and said, "If there is anything out there, please, you have to help me. I can't do this anymore." It wasn't a prayer of faith. It was a Hail Mary. I wasn't even sure who I was talking to. I'd read articles that said prayer could have a positive impact on mental health by helping to reduce stress and anxiety. Other studies about physical healing were more debated, and frankly, I didn't care about the science. I was a person at the absolute end of their rope, grabbing for any lifeline I could find. So I made a deal with the universe, with God, with whatever might be listening. I would pray every single day for a year. 1 full year. In exchange, I wanted my life back. I wanted the anxiety gone. That was the deal. Day 1 started right there, on the kitchen floor, surrounded by broken glass. The first few weeks were awkward. I had no idea how to pray. I'd just sit on my bed, close my eyes, and repeat the same phrase over and over. "Please fix me. Please take this anxiety away." It felt stiff and mechanical, like placing an order at a restaurant I didn't expect to ever get served in. Some days, I'd forget until late at night, and then rush through it just to check the box. There was no magic, no sudden wave of peace. The anxiety was still there, loud as ever. Around day 30, I almost quit. I had a massive panic attack that morning, triggered by an email about a bill. My heart was pounding, my hands went numb, and I ended up curled in a ball on the floor, just waiting for it to be over. When the wave finally passed, I just felt angry. This is pointless, I thought. I'm talking to an empty room. Nothing is changing. I was ready to scrap the whole project. But then I remembered the promise I made to myself. 1 year. It was the only goal I had, the only piece of structure in my otherwise formless life. So, That night, through gritted teeth, I prayed. It wasn't a pretty prayer. It was angry and full of doubt, but I did it. For the next couple of months, that became the pattern. Me just showing up. The prayer itself wasn't changing my external reality, but something else was happening that I didn't notice at first. The simple ritual of stopping everything for 5 minutes was becoming a pause button on my day. It was a forced moment of quiet in the middle of constant mental chaos. Research suggests that prayer can calm the nervous system and lower the heart rate, much like meditation. I think on a subconscious level, that's what was starting to happen. My body was learning what it felt like to be still, even if my mind was still running a marathon. The first real flicker of change came around month 4. I was in the middle of my usual prayer, "Please fix me, please make this go away," when a new thought popped into my head. It wasn't an answer or a sign. It was a question. What if it doesn't just go away? That question terrified me. The whole point was for it to go away, but the question stuck around, and my prayer started to shift just a little. It became, "Please fix me, but if you can't, please just help me get through today." That tiny shift changed everything. It was the first time I'd even considered a reality where I wasn't cured but could still be okay. By month 6, I realized my prayers were becoming less of a list of demands and more like a conversation. I started talking about my fears instead of just asking for them to be taken away. I'd say, "I'm really scared about that bill. I'm afraid I'm going to be a failure forever." Naming the fear, saying it out loud in that quiet space, seemed to rob it of some of its power. Prayer was becoming a way to process the stress instead of just letting it consume me. It felt like I was sharing the burden, even if I was still figuring out who I was sharing it with. I wasn't being healed, not yet, but I was learning how to carry the weight. The second half of the year is where the real change started, and it was so subtle, I almost missed it. My daily prayer had become a rhythm, the first thing I did in the morning before my hand could even find my phone. It was my anchor. My anxiety hadn't vanished. I still had bad days, days where the fear felt like a tidal wave. But something fundamental had shifted. Before, the anxiety was the sun in my solar system, and I was just a tiny rock caught in its massive gravitational pull. Now, it felt like there were 2 suns, the anxiety and this new space of peace I was carving out for myself. My prayers kept evolving. "Help me get through today" slowly became, "Show me what to do today." It was a shift from passive desperation to active seeking. One morning, right after that prayer, I had a strange impulse. Not a voice from the heavens, just a quiet, simple thought. Clean the living room. The room was a mess, a perfect physical reflection of my mental state. And for the first time in months, instead of feeling paralyzed by the task, I just did it. I put on some music and cleaned for 3 hours. When I finished, I stood in the middle of the room, and it felt like I could actually breathe deeper. It was a small thing, but it was a win. These small, prayer-fueled actions started to stack on top of each other. One day, I prayed, and then felt the urge to go for a walk. I just went around the block, but for someone who had been terrified to leave his apartment, it was monumental. Another day, I texted an old friend, not to make plans, but just to say I was thinking of them. Turning my focus outward, even for a moment, felt revolutionary. The prayer wasn't magically solving my problems. It was giving me the strength and sense of purpose to face them myself. Around month 10, I noticed the biggest change of all. My prayers were no longer just about me. I mean, I still talked about my struggles, but I started praying for other people. For the friend I had texted, for my parents, for the grocery store cashier who looked like she was having a rough day. A year ago, this would have been unthinkable. My own pain was so all-consuming I had no room for anyone else's. Research suggests that praying for others can increase our own sense of compassion and connection. That shift from self-pity to compassion felt like its own kind of miracle, reducing the profound isolation that anxiety feeds on. The last couple of months were about reflection. I started a journal, writing down my thoughts after I prayed. I looked back at the woman I was on day 1, sobbing on the kitchen floor, so desperate for an external cure. She believed her life would only be worth living if the anxiety was surgically removed from her mind. The woman on day 300 was different. She was learning to live with the anxiety. She was discovering that her life wasn't defined by her illness, but by how she responded to it. The fear was still a passenger in the car, but for the first time, it felt like I was the one driving. And then, it was day 365, the last day of my experiment. I woke up and did my usual self-scan, a habit burned into me over the years. Was the anxiety there?
Yep, it was.
It wasn't the roaring monster it used to be, more of a faint hum in the background, but it was still there. My heart sank a little. By the terms of the deal I'd made, the experiment had failed. The thing I prayed for, the complete removal of my anxiety, hadn't happened. There was no thunderclap, no divine Tata moment. I sat on my bed for my final prayer. I closed my eyes, waiting for that old wave of disappointment and anger to hit me, just like it did on day 30. But it didn't come. Instead, I was flooded with a feeling I couldn't quite place. It wasn't happiness or joy, it was gratitude. And then it hit me with the force of a tidal wave. The miracle had happened. It just wasn't the one I was looking for. I had begged for my anxiety to be taken away, but instead, I was taught how to walk through it. I had begged for the storm to end, but instead, I learned how to find peace in the middle of the rain. The real miracle wasn't the absence of fear, it was the presence of courage. The miracle wasn't the removal of my weakness, it was the discovery of a strength I never knew I had. The woman on day 1 was a prisoner. The woman on day 365 was free, not because the prison walls had vanished, but because she'd been handed the key to unlock the door from the inside. She could walk in and out when she needed to. The anxiety was still part of my story, but it was no longer the whole story. My life was saved, not by a physical healing, but by a deep, spiritual transformation. The evidence for prayer's effect on external events might be mixed, but the evidence for its ability to change the person praying, that's something I had now lived. I didn't get what I wanted. I got what I needed. I wanted a cure, but I was given resilience. I wanted an easy life, but I was given a meaningful one. I wanted the broken part of me removed, but instead, it was redeemed. And that was a far greater miracle than I ever could have dared to ask for. My journey is my own, but I know that feeling of being broken is universal. If you're in a place right now where you feel lost, shattered, or at the end of your rope, please know there is hope. You are not alone in that feeling. I'd be honored if you would share in the comments what you're praying or hoping for, so we as a community can see you, support you, and hold that hope for you. So, what happens when you pray every day for a year? For me, it wasn't that my problems disappeared.
It was that I grew bigger than them.
The simple act of showing up, day after day, with honesty and vulnerability, rewired my soul. It taught me that faith isn't about having all the answers or getting everything you ask for. It's about trusting that there's strength to be found in the struggle, peace to be found in the process, and that sometimes the most profound miracles are the ones that happen inside of us. The journey didn't end on day 365. In many ways, that's where it truly began. And for that, I am eternally thankful.